Alright guys, I hear you. If you want to see a tutorial of this Enkanomiya build, well here it is. I'm going to be breaking down my build and my thought process behind it, so after this video you should be able to recreate your own version or even build something that's way better than what I have. So first, the inspiration of this build is obviously the actual Enkanomiya under Inazuma, but there are some technical limitations to the Teapot building system, which is why I have to compromise, so I've neglected some detail of the original and trade for some aesthetic choices that I made to make the piece fit better inside my teapot. So as we swim closer to these islands, you'll probably be able to see which furnishings I used exactly, and mainly they're made up of these rocks, this stone brick type square block shaped furnishing, I don't even know what that's called, and the fences from Mondstadt with these stone pillars on both sides. At the top of the center island, to make my sun, I've had to use 15 of these Inazuma lamps stacked inside each other, all clipped into this tiny space. Once we reach the top spire, you can actually see that it's not a real tower, it's actually just the fence, but since the fence is arranged vertically to where you normally see it, you can't actually see the back, but from the side you can actually see what the fence looks like. You'll notice that the top fence is actually set slightly behind the bottom fence. The top fence will then seem smaller from afar, and this is a forced perspective trick to make your eyes think that the spire is taller because it looks further away. And throughout the build, you'll notice a lot of hidden lighting that you probably wouldn't have noticed looking at this from the front. This lighting is there due to a technical limitation. So in Genshin Impact, the lamps that you can place have light that reaches only a certain radius away from their origin. You can imagine this as a circle or a sphere around the center of the lamp. And if we draw that circle over the center of our 15 lamps stacked inside each other, you'll see that it doesn't even come close to reaching the other islands, which is why I have to place hidden lamps on the other islands to make it seem like the light is coming from the center island. Another thing is that the pillars and the roof is all made up of terrain blocks. You need a roof on this thing because without the roof you'll actually be able to see into the sky, and sometimes you can even see floating grass in the background. Also, for those of you that remember, I've faithfully recreated the floating candles of Enkanomiya. This is a bug in one of the versions that was removed after the version ended. Once we're in build mode, we can see that above ground the whole island's covered in terrain pieces to create the roof of Enkanomiya. If we remove some of these terrain pieces, we'll actually uncover what's hidden underneath, which is these towel pieces I like to place as my anchors for sunken objects. If we select that one and edit the set, we can actually bring out the islands from underground to above ground, and this is how we're going to edit these islands. Even though the islands are underground, you can't edit them underground since whenever you move something it's just going to pop back up. So that's why we have to finish editing everything above ground, and then after we're done with it, we'll move the entire island back down. So now you'll notice that the top two fences are actually missing from this. This is because they're actually floating underground, and I'll explain this later. But first we're going to take apart the build piece by piece. At the top layer we have two stone square blocks. They have the lamps and some fences on them, and if we keep taking down the middle layer, you'll see that it's just the square blocks with some fences on it. And since the fences are all pointing towards the center, the stone brick on top of it is going to cover the wooden part, and you'll only see the stone part, which is how you create these tower-like structures. At the very bottom layer we have some rocks to blending the square blocks to the foundation, which is the floating Inazuma rock. And at the very bottom layer we also have some fences that are pointing towards the center, and we actually use the lion for its base, which has a cool triangular pattern that looks like a carving on a stone wall. So now back underground we can actually see why exactly the top two fences are missing when we brought the island above ground, and this is because they're not sitting on any terrain, they're actually floating. This is the technique that I did not talk about in my techniques video, but this is actually floating furnishings underground, and this is also the technique I use to create those candles that are floating. So let me explain this technique. So let's say we want to float this fence. Normally we just use a snowman, we click through it, and now the fence is magically floating, easy peasy. The thing is, you can't see the fence if it's underground, so how are you supposed to do this technique? Well, first let's just select the anchor and then move the entire group underground. We're going to check that out so you can see the fence is sitting on top of the terrain underground. So we're going to have to find some way of removing the terrain without removing the fence. So the trick is, even though the fence is underground, you can actually still click where you think it's going to be underground, and that'll actually select the fence. So after we've selected the fence, you can tell because the group isn't selected. If we select the group, that means we selected the terrain. If we didn't select the group, that means we selected the fence that's on the terrain. So after the fence selected, you'll notice the handle for the rotation comes up in the bottom, and we're going to use that to fill out the circle of the rotation, and the center of that circle is where our fence is located underground. So we're going to position our our camera so that the snowman is over the center of that circle, and we're gonna click that snowman to float the fence that's underground, like how we would float anything above ground. So after we click, we can remove the terrain, bring the anchor piece above ground. You'll notice that the fence is not there anymore, and if we go underground, you can see the fence is indeed floating underground. On a related separate note, the funny thing here is that this isn't the actual technique that I used to create my original Enkanomiya. I actually created this build in 2.4 when Enkanomiya originally came out. So back then there was this other technique which you can use to sink things and float them underground without actually using the snowman. But the thing is, that technique that I used has been patched in the 2.6 maintenance. So I guess they did fix some things, but just not the things that we actually cared about. So that's just a little anecdote for you, but back to the video. The final trick I want to show you that helped me with this build is that in some realms, if you position your camera just right, you can actually see underground in build mode. Now, you can't actually edit anything here because if you try to move things, it won't let you put them down again. So what you can do is that you can check that you placed everything correctly, and if you see something wrong, you have to bring it above ground, edit it, and put it back. And other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.